Oh, really?
Kelly.
Just for you?
I've been there since '92.
Yeah, we're actually different. So, because it's got some.
There she is.
It's got some
Right. Only a few minutes. I mean, I'll tap on her fingers.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
Should we just start?
Guess so.
Can you guys hear us? Well, welcome everybody. We're so thrilled to have all the composers here, and this particular event, Meet the Composer, is supported in part by the New Music USA MetLife Creative Connections program, which helps really bring composers to the festival each season. So please help us, please join us in thanking the New Music USA. So I thought we actually start by, this is actually one of the questions I have. I mean, where do you guys find your melodies? I mean, does it come, when you're walking? For me, ideas tend to come to me during the showers for some reasons. Where do they come from for you? Anyone want to jump in?
Put on the line.
Why are you looking at me, Caroline?
I don't know.
Well,
Someone jump in. Derek? Do you sit, do you get up in the morning and say, okay, I have to come up with a melody today?
Well, sometimes a melody just lingers for a long time, and then you can't get rid of it. And the only thing to do is to put it in a piece of music.
Do you wake up in the morning with it? Sort of, sometimes,
It's kind
maybe?
of personal.
Okay, all right. Apparently, I've struck gold with the difficult question. I mean, I know, Kevin, the flute concerto, you've had that melody in your head since you said for a long time.
I mean, I wrote the melody. It sounds like I just walk around and I can't get it, it's in there or something. But I wrote the melody when I was in college for another piece, and it just didn't work so well in that piece.
So that's the answer, you get it from another piece.
That's right.
But do you sit in front of a piano and
Yeah, I think,
I like it how this goes?
Yeah, I think that's something we could, that I'm sure we all have a very different approach. I know Derek and I have talked about this, that Derek, I'm just going to talk about Derek's music and then he can talk about mine.
That works
That
well.
Derek, he thinks contrapuntally and melodically and I think harmonically.
Kevin thinks harmonically.
Thank you. So I can't say that. I wanted you to say that. So for me, it's sometimes a matter of, and I think actually Beethoven thought mainly harmonically. I think, and kind of.
But I thought you're the new Mozart. So
No, I wish, but and Mozart thought melodically. But anyway, so sometimes it's more of I have to really play if I'm going to use a melody in the sense that I think we're talking about, then I have to really play with it and manipulate it a lot. It doesn't just sort of come out perfectly, because the main thing for me is the chords that I'm moving through.
So you think about the harmony first, and then that's fascinating.
I don't agree that Kevin thinks about. No, I'm just kidding. But what I was going to say is I do think that it depends a lot on your instrument because it depends how your orientation toward music.
right.
So for me, my main instrument is the clarinet, so I tend to think in line.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
so-
Yeah, Derek. Yeah, right here.
Oh,
I think
so-
if we just talk a little louder, I'll pick it up.
okay.
Yes?
So
It was like, well, here we go. Let's turn these
sure.
around. Oh, no,
So we have Sean Fryer, Mason Bate, Thomas Newman, Kevin Putz, Derek Vermel, and Greg Smith.
I'll apologize in advance. We've, with all the technical issues, we've kind of maxed out our channels, so we're trying, these are not direct mics to be used in that way, so we're trying to get enough volume for you.
So we'll talk sort of into the mic.
Sure.
That will help,
Speak
yes?
loudly,
Okay.
that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Bear with us. Thank
What
you.
Carry a small
what about
stick.
you, Tom? Where do the melodies come from?
The more I think as a composer, the worse I am. So I try to get in situations where maybe I have a harmony or like two chords and I just start to improvise. And then suddenly patterns emerge, and from patterns, more patterns emerge. And
Is it on the piano usually, or is it on a computer?
It's
or
anywhere.
any-
Oftentimes, it's just if I can get on an instrument of some kind and noodle around and then look at a phrase that I've done, listen to a phrase that I've done, and then just see what it is doing and then how I can make it more.
You have even a special process. You like to record some of you like to play with the recording, and then you play it back and kind of play with it, right?
I do. Anything I can do to surprise myself and to trick myself, because I am probably self-critical. So a lot of times I'll record little fragments and then in instances of working in movies, give them to some of my sound designers and have them just mess with them, and then have them give the sounds back to me and see what it does. Just anything to be surprised.
So tell our audience, what do you mean by messing around? Like, do you like slow it down? Do you pull it apart? Do you invert
put it into a
it?
computer and move a knob or push a button, and probably in the most intuitive way. I'm fairly non-intellectual about my approach to it, because, as I say, the more intellectual I get, I feel like the worse I am. So I really try to avoid thinking.
So you play around and you go, I kind of like that.
That's right. I'm a listener. I think that as a composer, I think I like listening and taking in an idea I have as opposed to coming out with it.
Mason, you want to jump in?
Yeah.
And start to think about questions.
Can y'all
We'll come
hear?
to you next.
Can y'all hear this? It sounds like you.
We're dangerously close to feedback here.
Yeah, I know.
We are. Yeah, I was telling Tom, we are the problem in terms of
Me and Mason.
maxing out the sound channels here. In terms of like coming up with a melody, I'm a pianist, and so melody was the harder nut to crack for me versus harmony. But what I've tried to do in the past 10 years or so is really try to think more about the piece that I'm writing before I come up with the material, which is it's a challenge, and it's definitely something that it doesn't seem natural sometimes. If you're just like the vessel and the music is passing through you, I think it's good to be able to sit down and come up with something naturally. But with a piece like the one that's on the concert tonight, that has very much a dramatic shape to it, I needed to come up with a melody that I felt like would be able to tie these different movements together. I knew that the melody and alternative energy would kind of start in a junkyard as kind of like an evocation of an old Henry Ford or something. So I wanted a bluegrass melody that could also withstand some changes in different kinds of sonorities. So there was a lot of information about the kind of thing that I would need before I started writing, and it certainly does. There's definitely a conflict between your kind of intuitive musical desires and formal thinking. But I found that to create pieces that really can travel places, I've needed to step back a little bit at first and then figure out the sandbox that I'm going to play in.
Thank you. I guess for me, a little, like as Derek said, the instrument you play makes a big difference in terms of how you come up with material and what
was
kind of
your
material
instrument?
you come with. Piano, a very good composer instrument. And so one thing I try to do is, I guess, trick myself into coming up with things I wouldn't come up with otherwise by deliberately doing things on instruments that are out of my comfort zone. So maybe I take my idea on the piano and I can find great ways to harmonize it, or the rhythm's really easy to do. I can get big chords. But then if I want to have something more melodic or something that involves, let's say, pitch bending or glissandos, then I might try playing it on an instrument that I don't really play, a woodwind, or I might play it on a guitar, or maybe I'll even detune the guitar, and maybe that will give me an idea that I'd never come up with otherwise. So I like putting whatever little idea I come up with in as many different contexts as possible, hoping to reveal something that I wouldn't get otherwise.
Kind of like what Tom was talking about, you're trying to surprise yourself.
Yeah, because it is funny, it's like the harder you think, the less creative you get. And sometimes it's best to just work a little bit more quickly than you can actually process, and then you might stumble onto something good. And when you get there, then maybe you say, okay, hold on, let me take another look at that.
Cool.
And I guess for this piece, my orchestra piece tonight, there's not a tremendous amount of melody. And I guess I would say that I was partly thinking about melodies that would capture the character of the music I was trying to write. For instance, in the beginning, something kind of big and gritty and urban. And then the others are just little melodic fragments that I thought would be able to work in a variety of contexts.
I mean, to me, it feels like you're playing with sounds, actually.
Yeah, and that's the thing, if you're writing a piece in which you really want the listener to focus on these tiny little changes in sound, or sounds that are very complex once you really just start focusing on the sound itself. If you write a melody, then all of a sudden the attention is drawn away from the detail of the sound. It just becomes following the shape of the melody. So sometimes you have to decide what you're going to do and not going to do in order to make sure everyone knows where their attention should be.
Yeah. So, so Greg, do you have the answer before we turn to our first person?
So I'm up. If I cannot find something to steal from Tom, from one of his no, seriously, I like Tom's method because I find it's real easy to reject something that might have gone by, which is something that's countered when you have a collaborator. They say, hey, I think that's pretty good, and you stop and you develop and work on it instead of throwing it away. So I like to keep a kind of running track going. Tom, I think you said you become a listener then.
Well, it's also because of recording, your sense of memory doesn't have to be so active, because memory is such a muscle that if we're trying to remember something, we're not being necessarily as creative. Mm-hmm. So if you can record things, then you're just more improvising, and then you can listen back and just see what you've done.
Yeah, I think it takes some of that concentrating on trying to come up with a good melody out of the picture.
Right. Because
you don't have to solve it right at that moment. You can do a long string of consciousness or whatever you do, and then inspect what you have and not put too much effort into it.
So do we have a first question? Someone would like? Yes, sir. There's a mic right in front of you. Yes, please.
This is actually a question for Mr. Newman. One of the things about your music that I really like is that improvisational feel. It doesn't seem overly structured, but I think I'm starting to get a concept of how you come up with that, because it seems like you do sort of an improvisational style when you compose.
It's true. I love improvisation. I love corralling musicians and giving them loose ideas of something that I want to do, and just seeing what kind of creativity I can draw out. And that way, the work hopefully doesn't kind of reek of the candle of too much thought and forethought. But I think all of us, all people who are creative and expressive, whether they're compositional or not, have a real need to push forth with their creativity, and I just really mostly want to allow that to happen. I enjoy it, and it typically makes me feel like my music's stronger because of it. So I want to involve others a lot in that process.
And it's so true in It Got Dark, because when we're working with the Kronos, it's almost feel like they're having a good time by themselves. They're playing, they're some of the vibrato, they really enjoy it. It feels like you really give them that freedom and space.
It's true.
To play with sounds.
Yeah, and because they're so known for it. I mean, they're such a genre-bashing group, and they're so willing to improvise that it's really a great group to be able to collaborate with, for sure.
Anybody else? Yes.
I'm an Australian, so I'm going to speak really slowly so you can understand. No, I'd like to say, Carolyn and composers last night, Kevin and Derek, what an amazing concert last night. It was just superb, just superb. And Derek, I found I was, my toes were tapping at all your contrapuntal rhythms. It was awesome. And Kevin, I had tears in my eyes. Adam's playing was the most amazing flute playing I've ever heard. It was superb. Carolyn, what a sterling job you've done. Fantastic. Really good. Really good. So I look forward very much tonight to hear the gentleman on my left there. My question is to Greg Smith, who I believe has an amazing talent with young children. I think your medium, working with young children, it is so important to get that love of music straight away. So my question is, because that's the medium you work with, two parts, is this why you still retain your boyish charms, or do you have a portrait in the attic?
What was the last?
Or do you have a portrait in an attic?
Picture of Dorian Gray. Did you really ask me about Dorian Gray? I just hope my wife will view this video sometime in the future. Boyish charm. I love the orchestra. I'm totally sincere about that. And when you truly love something, you want to tell somebody about it. You just saw a movie and you want to express. Well, I feel that way about the orchestra all the time. And so for the unindoctrinated, I hate to even call them kids, you know, it starts to sound like you're talking down to them. I want them to know about the orchestra, and too many kids don't have the opportunity to hear an orchestra, especially these days with the economy being the way it is for orchestras. So when we can get them in there, I want to do everything I can to show them what I love. And sometimes that means disguising what I'm trying to show them so that they don't think their field trip, as the concert was billed as, they don't want that to turn out to be a classroom experience. So I try to divert their attention with hopefully some jokes and some entertainment. And when they're not looking, I show them the orchestra. And hopefully it sinks in. And so far it's been the most gratifying experience of my life. And I wouldn't have gone near, I didn't know what a young person's concert was until Marin asked me to write one. So Marin is responsible for putting me on the map. Thank you, Marin.
Anybody else? Yes, please. Sure, I'll repeat the question after you've asked it. So it's sort of a short question, but a long prelude. The gentleman saw a production of, what was it again?
Cunning Little
Cunning Little Woman. It's an opera by Janacek, and he's wondering if we could do it here in the children's concert.
Well, obviously, you were moved by it as well, and the choices for the the family concerts are not made by me. I'd be here every year, wouldn't I? But I think it's just been made known to the people that do make those choices by you bringing it up. So thank you.
Do you guys remember some of your, like, when was your earliest memory of an orchestral concert? Anybody want to jump in? Sort of. Like, I mean, I know for Marin was the Young People's Concert, and you would learn Bernstein, and that kind of set it up. Well, you grew up with.
Well, I remember the first piece that really kind of rocked me, which was the New World Symphony of Dvorak, because it was just, I mean, it's an old chestnut, I know, but it was just so dramatic and physical, and I think, wow, I kind of could relate to classical music.
Do you remember how old you were?
I was probably older than I should have, and I'm guessing in my teens, but I remember it was Antal Dorati. It was a real specific memory of latching on, you know, to something that truly interested me, as opposed to a teacher saying this should interest you. Like, oh, Beethoven is so incredible. And you go, is Beethoven? I mean, of course he is, but when you're a kid, you're not so sure. But to actually listen to a piece and love it, that was a great moment for me.
It's also fascinating when you talk to a lot of kids and you find out different kids relate to, you know, different music. And when you play an education concert, sometimes the kids will say, I like the Mozart, I like the Beethoven, oh, I didn't like that, you know, Schumann so much. I mean, but it surprises you. Mason, do you remember what was yours?
Well, the first orchestral experiences I had were going to Richmond Symphony in Virginia, where I'm from, and so that was just a great example of a regional orchestra bringing in a listener. I gotta say, though, that before that happened, my ears had definitely been primed by some of the non-classical music I was listening to. I mean, there was a huge amount of psychedelic rock. You think of Pink Floyd in the 70s that had vast orchestral resources going on behind the band, and I never really put it together until recently. But I think that in some ways that was like my first real introduction to orchestral sounds, particularly combining with electronic sounds. And when you start thinking about what some of those artists were doing with drama and kind of storytelling, that was very important to me, equally as important as hearing, Bartók and Beethoven at the Richmond Symphony. So there actually is a lot of orchestral music out there. I think probably a lot of people encounter it through movies, through fantastic orchestral composers. I mean, one of them's here. But you can also get it outside of the concert hall. It's just that I think when you actually go to
you mean like in the elevator? Just
that might not do it. But if you have a really good regional orchestra, that can turn the tide.
I just remember in high school, I heard like a symphony orchestra for the first time, and it was. I remember thinking bassoon had like the funniest sound. I don't know why.
True. Well, actually mine was through recordings. My parents played actually the New World Symphony was one of them. And
Oh,
I
wow.
just, I remember listening to that at my grandparents' house on an 8-track, and blasting it, and my grandmother saying, "Turn off that racket!" You know, just like, but anyway, that and Beethoven symphonies. I remember breaking one of the record, and my dad taking me to the store to get another one, and I picked out whatever had the best cover. That's the one we got. So anyway, but
How old were
yeah,
you,
but,
Kevin?
let's see, we lived in Missouri still, so I must have been 5, 6, 7. I'm not sure. 7. It was before we moved, so yeah.
Anyone want to jump in before we go to the next question? Yes.
The real world.
Surgery. Could you all hear the question? The question is, what will we listen to on our iPod if we were on our way into surgery?
What kind of surgery are we?
I guess we can pick our own surgery choice. Anybody want to start? Sean, you're looking like
I honestly
you're...
don't think I'd be listening to music.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I don't. It's rare that I use music to get my mind off of things. Actually,
Right.
more often when I'm listening to music, I want it to exaggerate whatever emotional space I'm in. So if I'm excited, I might listen to something that I really want to sing along to. It'll really pump me up. If I'm already relaxed, then I might go with that. If I'm driving on a really curvy road and I can go really quickly, I'll find up like the most intense electronic music I can. But yeah, it's usually to exaggerate what I'm already feeling rather than to subvert it.
Just so we get answers to the questions, I'm going to amend it
Sure.
to say, if you could put 3 pieces on your iPod before spending 3 weeks on a desert island,
Okay.
what would it be?
So basically, she wants to know what's on your iPod. Tom, do you have any of your own music on your iPod?
I do.
What's on your iPod? Which one of your music's on your iPod?
Oh, I several of my scores and stuff. I mean, I tend to like listening to my own music privately for some reason.
So tell us like three pieces that's currently on your iPod.
Oh, man.
Oh, come on.
Well, some Bartok string quartets. How's that for kind of pretension?
Not quite yours.
Well, that's right. You're talking about my music?
That's what you just said.
Well, okay. I did a score called the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, and there's 3 pieces in it. So there you go. 3 pieces. There's actually more than 3 pieces, so you get more of the answer.
I have to say, I just want to say that this is kind of like, I'm a little starstruck because last night I got to meet Tom. He's going to get all embarrassed, but the Shawshank Redemption really is some of the most beautiful music I think ever written for film, and I really think it has, maybe not in the flute concerto that you may or may not have heard last night, but in some of my pieces I find myself, and I think a lot of my students too, kind of imitating it. I mean, not trying to steal it, but just the kind of affect and the kind of harmony and the vibe. It's really is great to. That would probably be that score might be on my 3, actually. And then I would say Steve Reich, music for a large ensemble, and then I'd have to choose a Mozart piano concerto.
Not the 21.
Maybe.
Anybody else? While you think about it, let's see. Oh,
I saw a hand.
There's a hand?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Can you all hear the question? So the question is, what she often think of Mason and think of Bucks. Probably more had to do with the rustic Carolina, the very first piece you heard of Mason's. And the question basically is, where do you hear all these sounds?
Well, when I was first getting involved with having electronics in the orchestra, it seemed like a very natural place to go. And Rusty Air in Carolina was a piece that was very close to my heart because I got to bring in these field recordings of the South and kind of integrate them with ambient orchestral textures. As I moved along with this this kind of interaction, electroacoustic symphonic music, I started to move away from some of the purely naturalistic, almost like new pastoral type pieces. And I got, I guess, past couple of years, I've gotten interested in technology being a kind of a theme. There are pieces like Mothership. Alternative energy, it certainly, I think at the end of the day, as a composer, you're really driven by sound, and you're driven by something very visceral. And I think that before I even kind of get to the topic of energy and all the kind of intellectual things about it, I think I really wanted to have a piece that would start in a kind of bluesy world without any kind of electronic sounds, and then sort of erupt into this highly industrial kind of landscape where the maybe the car parts of the first movement that you hear in the percussion section kind of jump into the electronics. So for that, I actually went to a particle accelerator outside of Chicago called Fermilab and recorded all these sounds. And there's actually somebody made a video of it. It's kind of it's like the only video I have of me making these recordings. And it really is like finding sounds. And so what I started to realize was that there is a whole world of kind of imaginative interactions between electronic sounds and acoustic sounds that go beyond the naturalistic world. And so since Rusty Air in Carolina, the cricket piece, I've had a piece that has like a NASA field recording, a NASA archival recording that's set to music. This piece has all kinds of machinery. And I think that whether or not you use electronics in a piece, it's great to really think about the qualities of sound. And so we've heard a couple of these guys, Sean and Tom, talking about getting different instruments, and I think sometimes just getting your hands on the sounds is a great way to get your imagination rolling.
So Mason, just curious, so we have quite a few birds in tonight's concerts. Where did you get your bird sounds?
Well, so those are future birds. So
So where do future birds sound come from?
well, that was those were real birds.
From the future?
From the future. Yeah, but I took these the most kind of exotic field recordings of birds that I could find. And these were actually recordings, because I have not hung out for extended periods in the Amazon. And then I would take them.
So you found it
through
like on the internet or like
yeah,
is
like
there
some
like a
samples.
library of sound somewhere?
There are a lot of sample libraries of things. Generally, I think it's good to record it's good to be part of the making of it. I don't think you have to do it in every circumstance. But for these, I needed like a super whacked sound of a bird doing, like really weird kind of like ups and downs. And then I took that and kind of put that through my electronic meat grinder to kind of really make it sound weird. I wanted to have this particular bird kind of go through these 6 speakers. I'm not sure the effect is totally heard because there's a kind of a spinning theme in this piece. So, sometimes you can get it by actually going out there, and then I think sometimes, you can get it by taking a sound and processing it.
And Tom, your bird come from, you actually went out and recorded your own birds.
Yeah, up canyon, kind of, in my kind of the canyon I grew up in, Rustic Canyon in West Los Angeles. I was always kind of interested in what it would be like to just, where did the creek begin, and, so I started hiking in the 80s, and I started doing just recordings of the canyon just as a way of remembering it. And there's a place way up in Rustic Canyon, just below Mulholland, called the Blue Grotto, and I think I recorded them in like 1995 above the Blue Grotto in Rustic Canyon.
So do you actually go there and hang out for a length period of time and wait for the right bird sound?
No, I think you go up and you sometimes, there's like coyotes howling, and you get out your thing and you turn on your mic and suddenly they just stop howling. So a lot of it is just what you end up getting, or like a fly will just go right past your mic, and or something like that.
So how long do you actually spend at the site, for example?
You maybe go to different places and you record for anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, and then you listen back and you see if there's something. I agree with Mason. I mean, it's great to record things and to put them with other things, because you can't kind of dream it up with a pencil, and just to see how things interact. It's just a lot of fun.
Hey, there's one. I know I was already talking, but there was one kind of genie in the bottle experience I had getting the sounds for alternative energy. I had this idea that I wanted that second movement of this piece to begin like this huge machine booting up. And I thought I was definitely going to get that sound at Fermilab, which is this 4-mile particle accelerator. And I went there, recorded all this stuff. But because it's a big installation, you're never really like in the middle of it in the way that you might imagine it sounds. And so when I was leaving, the guy said, "Did you get everything you wanted?" And I said, "I didn't actually get the big machine booting up sound that I wanted." And they all said, "Well, there's this other thing called the quench." And they all started talking about it in this bizarre way. And I said, "Well, what is that?" And they said that it was this hydrogen release or helium release or something off the top of one of 6 buildings across this huge 4-mile campus that happened once a month at a kind of random time in a random place. But they said that these guys, government energy facility, suddenly they had all this time on their hands, and they said they would go and figure out how to record this for me. So they set up all these these sound triggering recording devices. So the next thing I know, I've got like all these scientists like trying to capture this sound, and I finally got an email that said, "Hey, we got the quench," and it's the first electronic sound you hear, this kind of massive explosion, and that took like a team of government energy scientists.
Do they know what's happening?
No, they had to set it up to be like activated by sound. So they were like going on top of 6 buildings. And at a certain point, I said, y'all should, don't feel like you have to like shirk your work on the Higgs boson or whatever you're looking for to record this sound. But if you can get it, that'd be great.
Anybody else have questions? Yes.
Hey, they already answered my other question, so I'm going to ask Thomas Newman, how do you match the emotional sound with like the video when you're doing a soundtrack?
Talking about movies now.
Yeah, I'm talking about movies now.
It's really, the good thing about image is there it is, and if you put up music against the image, you're bound to have a reaction to it. And if you're honest and open, you can say, I don't really like what the music is doing to that image and how it's coloring the emotion, and now I'm going to try something else, and oh wow, I like that better. And my silly analogy is kind of like an eye test. It's not like a doctor will say, tell me what's in focus, right? He'll say A or B, because what is focus? I mean, why are we moved and how is so elusive. But if we have an idea and we look at it and listen and we have an emotional reaction and then we have another idea and react, it can be very easy to say, I like this better, and then to ask yourself why. And then you can make a kind of intellectual conclusion about why you're more moved. It's too slow, it's too fast.
Do you get the film first and then figure out what music will go with it?
You have to, if you think
and do
about it.
you write a few different sound pieces or part of music and try to see which one goes better?
Yeah, try to write as much as I can, because it's not just me, it's a director. I mean, I'm a sub kind of creative force in a movie, so, it's very easy for something I like to not be as well liked by a director, so that becomes a matter of collaboration and interpretation of adjectives, Isn't this deep and rich? No, it's dark. What, it's dark? No, it's deep. It's hard to have conversations like that, so it's better to, rather than to argue a point about, let me tell you why it's deep, you write something else. The best way to protect an idea you have is to write something else as opposed to defending the idea you're trying to defend. And then you can have a real conversation with someone about, what's the difference. And it's,
so you do a little bit of, is it you like an A or you like B kind of eye doctor
I
thing?
think it's a good thing. I think it's courteous to a director, and it's after all their film. So.
And Greg, do you do quite a bit of something similar to what, do the images come first or do the music come first? I mean, how does that work for you?
Believe it or not, sometimes with commercials, which I still do, there's words involved, which
So the words come first in your case?
The lyric comes first, and they usually like to do what they call a pre-score, so that they can cut to the words, so that the visuals can actually match those words. If there aren't any words, then commercials are done as post-scores, just as Tom described to you. Not quite as colorfully, but it's a very interesting process. And I'm going to chime along with Kevin. I'll confess to being a big fan of Tom's as well. And it's really terrific to hear some of this inside stuff.
Anyone else? Yes, yes, sir.
Came off. I want to direct it to Kevin. I really love the flute concerto, and I loved watching the guy play. It looked like he was in charge of Carolyn, in charge of the symphony, in charge of the piece. Are there plans to record it, and would you be involved in that? Do you get to choose who the flutist would be and orchestra?
Well, my choice would be Adam, actually, the couple who commissioned the piece, Joe and Betty Hirsch, especially Joe, is very very enthusiastic about recording it, I don't want to. What we hope is that it might be recorded with Adam and the London Symphony, with Marin conducting. That's sort of what we've talked about, and I think Marin is interested in that happening. As far as whether or not it will and how soon, that's another thing. But I would love for it to be recorded. So, and as far as my being involved in the recording, I would just sort of show up and make comments. So.
Someone else? Is there a hand somewhere?
Can't quite see.
Yes. Maybe if you guys have a question, just feel free to step to the microphone.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, was there ever a time that any of you didn't have an orchestra that could actually play your piece, but you wanted to compose for that orchestra? You had like an idea for, an orchestral piece, but there was no commission. Like, what do you do in that situation? Like, have you always been commissioned to write for orchestras, kind of like?
Could you all hear the questions? Yeah. Oh, good. Someone wants to jump in?
Well, as the young composer, I probably have the most fresh experiences with not having many people who want to play things all the time. I think I could speak for everyone that none of us started off with orchestra commissions. It's sort of something that you hopefully work up to eventually. So a lot of it, hopefully you go to a school where you have an orchestra, student orchestra you can work with, and usually some of the first things you write are not necessarily pieces for an actual orchestra performance, but just a reading session where maybe you write the piece and you get 30 or 45 minutes with the orchestra and they'll read through it, maybe they'll play it, hopefully they'll record it. But the best thing you get out of that is just this experience of working with the orchestra, seeing which parts of your piece worked, which parts didn't work, and you walk away armed with much more knowledge than you ever had before, because the orchestra is just, it's such a huge thing, and the way that the composer interacts with the conductor and with the orchestra is so different from the way that the composer interacts with the chamber ensemble that there's just no way to begin getting comfortable with it unless you actually have those real opportunities to work with them.
What were some of your earlier experience? I'm guessing when people go to school, there's chances for music to be played or workshop. I mean, the Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music have a fantastic conducting composers workshop. Kevin was the mentor. I mean, really, that's another opportunity for people
it's
to
a great,
get experience.
yeah, exactly. There are a lot of things like that now, and I feel like when I was in school, when I was just starting out in my late teens, I guess, in college, I didn't know of these opportunities. But I mean, Derek is now the artistic director of the American Composers Orchestra. That's another fantastic orchestra who does readings of student pieces every year. I think they commission a piece too, right? And here at Cabrillo we have this, and the Minnesota Orchestra has a great program, Institute for composers to have their music played by, yes, it's sad, the orchestra is not in good shape now, as you may know. But I mean,
Actually, Sean came up through an ACO maybe you could tell me about that. Yeah.
Actually, my very first orchestra experience was working at a reading session at my undergrad school, and then really the next two orchestra pieces I wrote both got off the ground because of the American Composers Orchestra, and Derek was intimately involved with both of those. So the first one was a reading session for which composers could submit a piece which maybe had been recorded, maybe not at all. And then I got to work with the orchestra for a few rehearsals and a performance. And then a few years later, I was able to submit a proposal to the American Composers Orchestra through a program they had called Playing It Unsafe. in which they had solicited calls for pieces that a normal orchestra wouldn't be able to do, either because it requests something extreme of the orchestra, or it has a lot of electronics, or it's got, multimedia installations, whatever you wanted. So I don't know where I would be in terms of orchestra pieces without ACO. It's been a tremendous help to me, and I know a lot of other composers.
But there are a certain number of orchestras in the country that really serve that purpose. I mean, one is the Albany Symphony, who does a lot of new music with their music director, David Allen Miller. Obviously, Marin, and she does new music all the time, and other orchestras like the Boston Modern Orchestra Project. There's a few that really continue to do lots and lots of contemporary music. And because of programs like this here in Cabrillo, I mean, there's way more on the landscape, and you have wonderful conductors like Carolyn who just, can embody these new pieces and make them come to life. And I think things are different, really, even than when we were coming up. And I think.
Would you say things have gotten easier or easier?
I think
it's not easy. It's never easy.
I mean, it's never easy, but would you say, I know, it's like
But
people
the-
ask me, has it gotten easier for, conductors?
Well, I think there may be more opportunities. I mean, I just didn't know about them. I didn't look beyond my
There
little.
wasn't internet back then, so probably
That
a
could be
little
part
harder
of
to
it. That could
find
be
out.
part of it, right. You'd have to look for things pinned to a bulletin board back then.
But I think, I mean, there's a lot of work. Like, learning how to write for orchestra is a kind of lifelong process, and that's one of the things that makes it daunting, but also very rewarding. I think we all are in that process of just learning constantly, and I think, Sibelius thought he was learning. I mean, I think
Right.
it's you always feel daunted by the orchestra. There's so much color, there's so much there, that you can, that it's daunting, it's frightening, and it's stultifying sometimes. So I think we all I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but from my experience, it's a lifelong learning experience, and I think for young people who don't, if you're looking for a chance to write for orchestra, or there are people out there looking, just keep learning and keep absorbing and keep trying to keep using all the opportunities you can get your friends together to read stuff, play stuff, record it, play it back just keep learning in any way you can, because when the experience comes and it hits, you don't have too many opportunities to take advantage of that, so you want it to really work when you can. And go to readings like these readings that where you see where Carolyn was working with the young conductors and young composers, and people are giving criticism, and you can take that in too.
Any other questions? Yes. Just feel free, step over, and it's good, we have several. Well, for 1, 2, 3, 4, good. Or, yes.
This is actually a Carolyn question.
Okay. Meet the composer.
Under that, well, but it fits in with the living composer, and that, what are the pressures that you're under when you include, like in your upcoming season, you'll have Mason Bates's Alternate Energy. What kind of pressures are you under when you really would want to include much more contemporary, much more living composers in your the job you get paid for? I don't know, at home.
Well, I suppose it's two-part questions. I mean, if it were just up to me, I would say I want to do it as much as I can. When you're a music director of an orchestra, you have to take into consideration of the box office and where the audience is. I like to think of it as taking the audience on for a ride. It's a journey. It's a long journey. And I like to get them to the place where really the Cabrillo audience is, which is people come to Cabrillo Festival when you come to a concert, you don't expect to like everything. You expect to like something and not like something. And then the best part is all of you go away, you start to talk about it. And you see your friends and you say, were you at the concert last night? And the answer better be yes, because then you can join in the discussion. So that's where I would like to get my audience, where they come with an open mind and they can talk about it afterward. So it's a long journey. I have to take them with me slowly.
My question is for Thomas Newman, but it's largely just to alert people to the wonderful listening guide that you can find online, along with the program notes for the concert tonight. And I wondered, where did that listening guide come from with all the pictures of the old postcards and
Came from all out of my head.
It's,
It was,
you.
It was, thanks. It was just, when the piece premiered in 2009 in Los Angeles, I was struck by how much information I wanted to give the listener. Were these supposed to be general kind of bits of ephemera that it was enough to know something about them and to abstract them in the context of the piece? Or was it more interesting to know a lot more about these little bits of ephemera that kind of inspired the pieces? So it's kind of an experiment tonight to see if it's, poetical or prosaic. I'm not sure. I hope it lends poetry to the piece, but it just gives you, I guess, a bit of insight into, the process of finding these things and trying to attach feeling or musical feeling to image and spoken word.
I was listening to how it's been described as creating sound, working with sound, mixing sounds, and it suddenly occurred to me as to whether any of you have ever thought of creating a new instrument for an orchestra that's just never been used before.
Anybody?
A new instrument, what?
For the orchestra.
Have you ever thought about creating a new instrument
For the orchestra.
for the orchestra? I guess maybe in some ways by tapping into the particle accelerator sound or the birds. I mean, that is in a way. I mean, I actually find that composers are tapping other sounds, not so much their instrument, but their electronic. In some ways, that's sort of an extension of it.
Yeah, I've found that I've been working for years to try to get a whole new section, the electronic section, integrating the orchestra in a way that works in the realities of the orchestral situation, which is simply. And so no matter how complex it is in the studio when you're painting up the sounds, it really needs to be simple when it's worked out. This piece is a little more complicated because it's got some surround stuff. But all of my pieces can happen, when I'm not there. I don't make it locked into a particular piece of gear. I've had people ask me, there was there was somebody who asked me, we're developing this new incredible touch surface thing. Do you want to write something for it? Answer is no. Because when I've looked at the history of this kind of thing, it's when you lock yourself into a piece of gear, then
It gets outdated.
It just gets
at some point,
obsolete. It goes obsolete. So I found that if it can be just about the audio that's coming through the speakers, then you have this thing, and that alone adds a huge palette of sounds. And of course, the orchestra. I mean, it's cool to imagine new instruments coming in, but when you imagine all of the different possibilities of just the instruments.
I was just going to say, in many ways, I mean, you guys are constantly creating new instrument in a way, because,
I was thinking
there's oboe and
Right.
flute, and then, you put them together, you get flobo.
I was thinking of this, a couple of examples. One of the students, David Biedenbender, who is one of the three composers here, he has a great sound at the beginning of the piece where you have it's very high pizzicato, like a high B, 5 lines above the staff, plus piccolo, plus xylophone. Maybe David's here, I can't remember what it was, but that's an instrument. And I was listening to the Rouse Symphony last night, and he created an instrument by, you have the cymbal go like, psh, and you catch it, psh, and then he has the woodblock go, tk. So that together, the woodblock going, tk, like 2 woodblocks or 1 woodblock, maybe 1 woodblock. But,
Yeah,
that's sort of like he made a little percussion, like a new percussion
And that's what I
instrument.
was thinking, you guys are really constantly creating new sounds. I mean, you don't actually need a whole, and that's what's so fantastic about all of you composers. You somehow find ways to come up with all these new sounds that are constantly surprising us.
Yeah, orchestration is really, that is the process of orchestration, is combining sounds in ways that maybe, that's why you can often tell a composer like Debussy or Brahms by the way they orchestrate. It's so characteristic. Schumann, beginning of Unfinished Symphony with that clarinet and oboe. It's so unusual, that sound. I mean, I don't know if somebody had used it in that way before, so it becomes like a signature of certain composers, the way they orchestrate. And for me, one of my teachers, Louis Andriessen in Holland, he always included bass guitar and electric guitar and saxophones in the orchestra. It wasn't a choice for him. So if he was going to orchestrate, he didn't like the orchestra because it didn't have those things, because he felt those were the instruments of our day. So just like what Mason's doing with, where he's including beats and electronics, that for him is obviously integral to the way he thinks about the music of his day. And for Louis, that was important. For me, it's also important, combine jazz band with orchestra. Composers now combine the gamelan, like Lou Harrison, with orchestra, and there's so many different ways that there are existing instruments that you can combine and mix in. I mean, Chinese orchestra, imagine, that's a whole orchestra made up of Chinese instruments. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's incredible, and it's so rich and varied in the sound as well. So it's.
And in many ways, really, I think for each one of you, you have such your own unique sound. So you could say that you each have your own unique instrument. And as you write, I can tell, this just by listening to the music, even if I don't know who it is, probably by Kevin, probably by Derek, and, same thing with Brahms and Beethoven. You can tell, even if you don't know the piece, you can guess who's by. Anybody else? Yes.
For any of the composers, could you talk about the future direction of any of your composing in terms of ideas, concepts, and what you're developing now?
I had a funny realization yesterday when I was driving up here, and I realized what I get from the Cabrillo Music Festival, and I've come here a number of times. I find out how conventional I am. And then I come and I hear 2 nights of concerts. I hear all these possibilities, and we're talking about orchestration. It's the same thing. And it opens me up, and I think I'm better for it. And then I come back next year and I find out how conventional I really am. But it's kind of an ever-expanding loop, and it's very, very, very helpful. Just this talk in this last 10 minutes, combining instruments, it becomes another instrument unto it. I'm thinking already. And it's inspiring. And that's, I can't tell you how grateful I am for this festival. It sounds schmaltzy, but I mean it. It's wonderful.
Anybody else want to?
I wanted to tell you guys about this project that I'm doing, which is I'm actually rapping on this. I'm working with a couple of jazz musicians who are making beats, and I'm doing this next week, actually. And I'm kind of rhyming over these different beats, which are kind of in odd meters. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is not because it has anything to do with the orchestra, but just because there's no commission. It's just a project that I want to work on. And I think that we all have these kind of pet projects, and sometimes, what gets known is what gets press, or, what gets into the radio or something like that. But I think we all are really, when you're interested in stretching, you also have to have projects that are not commissioned, that are maybe your own interests that might get put on the shelf, or that, which are just in order to grow. And hopefully, for me, it's very important to keep doing things that help me grow and learn as a musician. Those are really the most important projects for me to continue to get better at what I do.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I'm just like a person who knits, I think. I feel like I just need outlets, so I'm just happy to have an outlet and to be able to noodle around, and if I can take it somewhere else, I bet I have very little sense of future, other than I'm just grateful that I have the outlet, I think.
I guess I kind of feel like a dog on a scent. And that there are new things interesting me all the time, and they're not necessarily in the same, one thing one year isn't the same thing I was interested in the other year. And if I get really into it, I figure I should just go for it. I should find some way to incorporate what I like about that into what I already do. just to continually see if I can't stretch myself in different directions so that I have an expanded palette. And I guess I couldn't say that there's any one direction or one style of music that I see myself going in, but that I end up with the broadest palette I can, so I could pick the right color or the right affect for whatever it is I'm trying to write. And sometimes when you're a dog on a scent, you wander too far and your nose gets bitten or something like that. So, but that's part of learning to be a composer too, is learning which boundaries you set up for yourself that are arbitrary just because you've never explored on the other side, and which ones you've set up for good reason, because either you don't like what's on the other side or you don't do it very well. So that's my process.
Ellen, do we have time for one last question? Last one. Oh, someone else who haven't asked anything, or you can fight over it. You have the right T-shirt on.
I noticed that the tickets for Cabrillo, can you hear me? Okay, yeah, okay. I noticed that the tickets for Cabrillo are limited to people over 50 or 60, but a few people under that have crawled in. But almost everybody here and on the program is playing really new things, which is, of course, why a lot of us come. And Greg touched on this issue too, and everybody has a little bit. But how are all of you addressing this issue of the people that come to concerts are older?
Yeah, I can assure you all that there's a lot of hand-wringing, especially in the orchestral world, less in like the chamber music world. As Mason was talking about, there are many more people trying to change the format of the way that's presented. And I think the fact that, that the concert music world is more welcoming of composers from other genres, or who've come up in different ways through pop music, through music, music from TV and film, through dance, all kinds of things. There are many more things coming together now, and I think that that's making things more open, and I think that's generally a good trend. But in the orchestral world, there's a lot of hand-wringing about it and a lot of questions being asked. But again, it won't get solved until the questions get asked. So we're now in that stage of asking a lot of questions and people trying a lot of new formats, I think. But as you said, in China, things are
different, yeah.
Are really different.
So,
So
some thoughts?
Not particularly, no. Actually,
Well, I just want to say, I really do think that, especially with contemporary music, the way it's going, with all of these composers writing the way they're writing, I truly believe, because of contemporary music, the future of classical music is very bright. So thank you all so very much for being here.
It's okay, yeah, thanks.